Dear Rabbi, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to give a warm welcome and thanks to all of you for taking the time and making the effort to mark this important day. I would like to recognize and extend my thanks. I would like to recognize and extend my thanks to all of the organizers of this annual event. We're very proud of the strong partnership that we have in organizing the Holocaust Memorial each year here in Reykjavik. With Ambassador Dietrich and the German Embassy, Ambassador Gerard and the Polish Embassy, Chargé d'Affaires Michelle Yerkin and the US Embassy, and the Jewish community of Iceland. I would like to thank Martin Eyjólfsson for joining us as well. Thank you. I would like to thank the Polish ambassador and the Polish embassy for hosting today's event. Today, we commemorate the Holocaust. We commemorate 6 million Jews, men, women, and children, who were murdered in the most inhumane ways. 6 million. It's a number we cannot comprehend. Think about the individuals, each one an entire world. And I think about my family, my grandfather, Mendel, and his brother, Nahum, who were the only two to survive, while all of their siblings, parents and grandparents, were killed in the gas chambers. I'd like to take you back to Austria in the early 1900s. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian Jew, born in 1905 in Vienna, was a psychotherapist and philosopher. He developed and lectured about his own new approach to psychological healing. He believed that what drives people is primarily the will to find meaning in life, and that it is this sense of meaning that enables people to overcome painful experiences. At that time, he was not always respected. In many cases, he was ridiculed and mocked. Only 9 months after he married his wife, Dr. Frankl and his entire family were deported to the concentration camps. He would spend 3 years in 4 different concentration camps. Dr. Frankl described his horrific experiences in the camps. The conditions were horrible. Starvation and disease were rampant. And the back-breaking work and the torture was unbearable. But he saw that somehow, some of the inmates were able to transcend their surroundings. There were men who walked through the barracks, comforting others, even giving away their last piece of bread. This proved to Dr. Frankl that everything can be taken from a man, except for one thing: the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given situation. Even in the face of the most severe suffering, a person can find meaning and hope. Dr. Frankl said something that only someone who went through what he went through could say. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Victor himself survived, but not his pregnant wife, nor most of his family. His father died of starvation and pneumonia. His wife died of typhus, and his mother and brother were murdered in the gas chambers. He was left with nothing. He was left with no one. Finally, the liberation came, but his heart was empty. He was numb. He didn't feel anything. There was no joy. There was no happiness. It was as if all of his feelings had died. A few days went by. Dr. Frankel was walking in the fields when he suddenly fell on his knees. At that moment, there was only one sentence on his mind. He repeated it again and again. A verse from Tehillim, the book of Psalms. From out of distress, I called to God. With abounding relief, God answered me. It was at that moment that his heart opened up. Life started again. Life came back to him. Dr. Frankel continued his work where he left off before the war. His experience in the death camps, seeing how some people were able to keep a sense of purpose, even under such conditions, strengthened his belief in his new approach. But like before the war, his papers and lectures were shunned. After much rejection and aggravation, he finally decided to give up. He was emotionally exhausted. He decided to move to Australia. At the same time, in Brooklyn, New York, a woman named Marguerite was visiting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Towards the end of her audience, she mentioned that she wanted to return to her native country, to Austria. The Rebbe surprised her by requesting a favor. The Rebbe asked that she visit Dr. Viktor Frankl. Please send Dr. Frankl my regards, said the Rebbe, and tell him to be strong and continue his work. No matter what, he shouldn't give up. If he remains strong and committed, he will certainly prevail. Marguerite arrived at the clinic in Austria, only to find out that the professor hadn't shown up in 2 weeks. Marguerite managed to find Dr. Frankel's home address and knocked at the door. Marguerite was asked to wait. A moment later, an uninterested Dr. Frankel appeared at the door. I have regards from Rabbi Schneerson of Brooklyn, New York, she announced. Rabbi Schneerson said, remain strong, continue your work with complete resolve. Don't give up. Ultimately, you will prevail. Suddenly, tears filled his eyes. Dr. Frankel was astonished. How in the world did the Rebbe know about his situation? And why should this Hasidic Rebbe care about him or his philosophy? It was exactly the boost that Frankel needed. Instead of moving to Australia, he continued his practice as a psychiatrist and went back to his work, full of motivation and optimism. Soon after, in 1959, Dr. Frankel's book, Man's Search for Meaning, was translated into English and became a bestseller. It led him to the international stage, and he received many honorary doctorates from universities around the world. His book sold millions of copies in dozens of languages. His approach inspired millions of people and inspired thousands of other books, all based on his idea of the human being's drive being the pursuit of meaning. My friends, the Holocaust did not happen in some distant country far away. It happened right here in Europe. It was committed by educated, advanced, and sophisticated people. It happened slowly and in a calculated way. It was years of demonizing Jews. It was years of targeting Jews, not seeing them as German citizens, not seeing them as Polish, Austrian, or Hungarian citizens, but as Jews who somehow were subhuman and didn't deserve respect and life. My friends, there is deep meaning to life. Everyone has their personal journey, and everyone finds their own meaning. When we could all recognize that there is in fact deep meaning to life, then we could truly respect others. We could respect and appreciate that their life is meaningful, that their life is sacred, that every life has infinite value. Brandele Paneth, a young Hungarian Jew, managed to escape the Nazis and hid in forests and wherever else she could hide. But she needed help. She needed food. She was at the mercy of the local people near her hiding places. Who could she ask? Unfortunately, most people would be willing to turn her into the Nazis, either out of fear of the authorities, or worse, they hated Jews themselves. In too many cases, it wasn't just the Nazis, but regular people throughout occupied Europe were happy to assist in attacking Jews. What did she do? She would stop someone and ask, "Do you have God in your heart?" If their face hardened, she knew she should escape for her life. But if their face softened, she could dare to ask for help. She knew that if someone has God in their heart, if someone has meaning and purpose in their heart, they could respect and cherish another human life. But someone who is empty of God, or of any kind of meaning, or any kind of purpose, they can be capable of stamping out and murdering an entire people. When you, your family, your circle of friends, and ultimately the entire world recognizes that life has true meaning, we will be on the road to a better future. During the Holocaust, there were righteous people who risked their lives to hide Jews and to save Jews. But unfortunately, they were just a small number. They were the exception. Our common goal should be that every child, every teenager, and every adult appreciates the infinite value of every human being, the infinite meaning of every human being, the sanctity of every human life, and that we are all created equal in the image of God. We hope and we pray and we work to create a world where the righteous are not just a few, but where respect, tolerance, and appreciation for all people is everywhere. Thank you.
Ministry for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Iceland, His Excellency Mr. Martin Eyjólfsson.
Thank you very much. Dear Rabbi, dear friends, thank you for inviting me to this important event. We must learn the important lessons of history and the Holocaust by keeping the memory alive. As we remember, we have to remind ourselves of the importance of speaking up against the hatred that is still spreading across the world today. We see the spread of intolerance across the internet and social media every day. A growing trust deficit in governments and international organizations, and increased instability in the international rule-based order. Perhaps most disturbingly, hate is moving into the mainstream in liberal democracies and authoritarian systems alike. Political dialogue is again loathed with anti-Semitism, racism, and homophobia. We should be careful not to exaggerate the comparison to the 30s, but equally careful not to ignore the similarities. It's always easy to be wise when you're looking into the rearview mirror. Many were surprised by the Russian invasion into Ukraine, whilst others said they had been raising warnings for many years. Even though Iceland did not feel the weight of the Holocaust as such as many other countries, there is a lot we can learn, and there's a lot to remember. We all need to remember and remind ourselves of the importance of speaking up and defending our values. It is not a job for one religion or one single country or politicians, but it is a joint task of all of us that requires a constant cooperation between nations, religions, and cooperation among diplomats, religious leaders, academia, the media, education, and voters, to name a few. I want to end with a famous quote by Albert Einstein: "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." Thank you.
Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the Republic of Iceland, His Excellency Mr. Dietrich Becker.
If you allow me, I remain seated. Dear Ambassador, dear Rabbi Feldman, dear Permanent Secretary Eyjólfsson, dear friends, thank you very much for having organized this event on the occasion of Yom HaShoah. It's always an emotional event, especially for me as a German ambassador, to have the chance to commemorate the Holocaust side by side with friends like the Rabbi, the Polish ambassador, the American charge d'affaires, and the Jewish community. Commemorating the Holocaust together with the Jewish community all over the world is moving and an honor. Countless victims, often unaccounted even. Millions of daughters losing their mothers and fathers. Millions of mothers losing their children. Millions of fathers not returning home. Million grandmothers seeing all relatives being deported and never returning. A million loving couples separated forever. Brutally separated, tortured, abused, and murdered. Only one family thrown into this horror would have been enough. But million cases, no words can describe it. How many tears and cries. I think Rabbi Feldman did the right thing to take this destiny of one family as an example, but we have to multiply it by millions. This is incredible. This is not imaginable. but unfortunately it was the truth. The Holocaust will remain not comparable to other historic events in its size and horror, and the way it was organized. The Holocaust was possible because of the widespread anti-Semitism in Germany, in Europe, and around the world. In Nazi Germany, a thin layer of civilization broke down. Anti-Semitism resulted into looking aside, active discrimination, deportation, and mass murder and genocide. Therefore, I think the quote by Albert Einstein is, I think, a very important quote which we should remind always. Looking aside should be forbidden. Looking aside can be a crime. 77 years after the Holocaust, an industrial genocide organized by Germans, I often hear, why do you still bother? Why are Germans still looking into the history of the Holocaust? Why are you still haunted by this period of your history, this national shame? A regular opinion poll conducted by the BBC, worldwide conducted, asked which country should have a more important role in the world and should more have influence. Strangely, today's Germany comes very recently always to the top of this list. I guess even in Israel, people would like to have another role for Germany, more outspoken, more leadership from Germany. You feel this in the last months we've seen again. This might be true, but it will be difficult for Germany ever to take such an important role. The Israeli historian Yuval Hariri stated with regard to the actual situation, "We know you are not Nazis. Stand up and lead." This is flattering the representative of modern Germany. Yuval Hariri might be right. There is not more anti-Semitism, xenophobia and racism in Germany than in many other countries, but there is still, and we have to fight against it. And yes, Yuval Hariri might be right. However, this result of the positive assessment of modern Germany is done through education and especially through constant reflection in Germany of the history of the Holocaust, and it still needs further reflection on our role in the world. Being a positive force together with partners and not acting alone is our leitmotif. This task of reflection remains. Commemoration of the Holocaust is therefore essential. Commemoration of the Holocaust, also in Iceland, is one way to do so. And therefore I thank you again for having me today and being with you amongst friends. Thank you very much.
Chargé d'Affaires of the United States Embassy to the Republic of Iceland, Ms. Rochelle.
Good afternoon. It is a privilege to join you today on this solemn occasion. This day is set aside every spring to remember those who perished during the Holocaust in World War II. We also remember on this day those who survived. They have borne the agonizing scars of what they witnessed, lost, and endured throughout their lives. The pain and horror of mass genocide reverberates for generations long after the counting of bodies is finished. As President Biden said several days ago, the legacy of the Holocaust must remind us that silence in the face of bigotry is complicity. Remembrance is our eternal duty, but remembrance without action risks becoming an empty ritual. Thank you, Ambassador Pokruszyński and your colleagues at the Polish Embassy for organizing this important occasion. to help us remember what happened. Together with Ambassador Becker, Permanent Secretary Eyjólfsson, Rabbi Feldman, who plays such an important role in the life of the local Jewish community, all of us here today bear witness to the Jewish lives, families, and communities that were wiped out, so much destruction, so many lost in the crematoria of extermination camps. The deliberate and systematic destruction of a group of people because of their ethnicity, nationality, religion, or race was formally assigned the name genocide by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish-born jurist who served as an advisor at the U.S. Department of War during World War II. Genocide was made a crime that was punishable under international law by the United Nations General Assembly in December 1946. While we have seen, and unfortunately continue to see, genocides, the Holocaust is unique. It was unprecedented in magnitude and moral bankruptcy. It was the systematic, state-sponsored persecution and killing of Jewish men, women, and children, and so many other innocent victims by the Nazi regime and its collaborators during the Second World War, including Roma, Sinti, Slavs, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ+ individuals, and political dissidents. We cannot simply remember, we must also resolve to act. Inside the U.S. Department of State, the Office of the Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues continues to work, almost 80 years after the end of World War II, on implementing U.S. policy when it comes to the return of Holocaust-era assets to their rightful owners, compensation for wrongs committed during the Holocaust, and Holocaust remembrance. The Office of the Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues seeks to bring a measure of justice and assistance to Holocaust victims and their families, and to ensure that the Holocaust is remembered properly and accurately, as we are doing here today. Recently, the United States co-sponsored a UN resolution that charged the international community with combating Holocaust denial through education. A renowned scholar of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstadt, was recently confirmed as President Biden's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. These issues are not just for governments, however. The dark forces that led to the Holocaust are recognizable today. They stoke hatred through lies, conspiracies, blood libels, and baseless accusations. Those forces are present in every society, even democracies. Anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust. It still exists, it's still virulent, and is actually on the rise, and it still poses an existential threat to the Jewish people. Therefore, everyone committed to democratic values, pluralism, human rights, and tolerance has a role in countering disinformation and the evils of propaganda to stop and prevent future genocides. We must work together to educate the public, and especially our young people, on what happened and how to recognize disinformation on social media and elsewhere. We must support press freedom and oppose censorship. We must also counter any attempt to cast doubt on the Holocaust. Holocaust denial is a form of anti-Semitism. Actions such as these ensure that our Holocaust remembrance is not an empty ritual, but an occasion to strengthen our resolve. Let me close by saying that the United States stands in solidarity with the Jewish people in the United States, in Iceland, in other parts of Europe, in Israel, and around the world, as we remember and reflect on the horrors of the Holocaust. We honor the memories of lives lost and embrace the wisdom and strength of survivors, a handful of whom are still alive to tell their stories. We draw strength from their example of being able to return to the realm of the living, to know that it is possible to regain hope, dignity, to go on to have children, to find beauty in our battered world, to create art, to grow science, and to grace us with their resilience. In memory of all those who were lost and in honor of those who survived, we must continue to work toward a better, freer, and more just future for all humanity. Thank you.
about 6 million victims, half of whom were citizens of my country, heroes of Poland. On April 19, we celebrated another anniversary of the outbreak of the ghetto uprising, one of the two uprisings that took place in Warsaw during the Second World War. Knowing what their fate would be, on April 19, 1943, Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto decided to at least die with dignity. A number of the survivors later took part in the Warsaw Uprising on August 1st, 1944. Many Polish Jews died fighting on different fronts of the barbaric war as Polish soldiers. Their graves with the Star of David are located in all Polish war cemeteries around Europe from 1939 to 1945. This painful tragedy reminds us of the historical fact that one man, with the support of his nation, in this case Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, could have devised a plan to murder an entire nation and successfully implemented it. But also that behavior of other nations and their leaders in the face of such a tragedy is extremely important. Valuable historical material are also the publication in the mass media and public opinion around the world, their position on these crimes. As we are commemorating this tragedy, we are in the third month of the Russian Federation attack on Ukraine, and in fact, the 8th year of the war that Russia wages against Ukraine in violation of all norms of international law. Let us note that once again, one man, Putin, with the support of the majority of his society, the Russians, came up with the idea of liquidating the Ukrainian nation, its state, culture, and traditions. Let us know how similar mechanisms are used. First, the propaganda of fencing aimed at inciting hatred towards the entire nation. Then, mobilizing the own nation to become perpetrators, and finally their implementation. That is mass atrocities carried out with contempt for the international public's opinion. The paradox is that perhaps the grandparents of the present murderers from Bucha liberated Auschwitz. The tragedy of the Holocaust should be remembered in order to pay due tribute to the victims, but also to prevent the appearance of figures imitating Hitler, Stalin, or Putin in the next generations. It depends on all of us, and in the first place, the leaders of other nations, leaders of international organizations, the mass media, public opinion, spiritual leaders, and all persons responsible for cooperation between nations and states. Thank you very much.
Thank you.